Mercy.
When was the last time you spoke to the Pope?
Friday morning last week.
Our third expert witness, Father Thomas Rosica, is a Canadian priest who acts as a media attaché at Vatican events. It means he's often up close and personal with Pope Francis.
I know him as this incredibly human, warm, wonderful pastor. Sometimes you have this insatiable urge, you just want to reach out and hug him, but before you can do that, he usually does it to you.
Father Rosica was a media attaché at the Pope's big meeting on the family, and in this privileged position spoke to him almost every day, getting, he says, a deep understanding of his views.
The Pope, one of his key words is to accompany people, to walk with people through the complexities of family life.
And he says the Pope explained to everyone present why it was perfectly in keeping with the Catholic faith to put the issue of divorced and remarried people up for debate.
The Pope reminded us that there are some things which are core elements that do not change. But there are some things that we must look at again.
And the document the Pope wrote afterwards, Father Rosica says, is a serious invitation to priests to spend time trying to understand why individuals who attend their church have come to be divorced and remarried, what struggles they've faced, and what their relationship with God is.
In order to bring people to Jesus Christ, you have to get involved in the messiness of people's lives.
So it would be up for a priest like you to really engage with the couple and to make a decision on an individual case-by-case basis about whether it's right that they should receive Holy Communion.
To a certain degree, yes, but such an accompaniment is not something that's done in 24 hours or after one initial meeting. Holy Communion is not candy that we throw out to people, but it is a journey and a process. And what the Holy Father does is enter into the journey, walk with these people, accompany them, and help to integrate them back into the life of the Church.
Is there a danger, though, that the Church, in trying to apply teachings to its age, could adapt to a point where the Roman Catholic faith loses its meaning?
No, it deepens its meaning. And mercy is not soft-pedaling the message of the gospel. Mercy is the mission of the Church.
Mercy is a central theme of Pope Francis's teaching. He has said that there is no sin that God's mercy cannot reach and wipe away, as long as you're sorry and want to be reconciled with God. The critics would say, though, that the Pope is promoting a type of relativism, that church teachings are not eternal, objective and absolute, according to the Pope's position here, but subject to interpretation.
Utter nonsense.
So why hasn't the Pope answered his critics? Father Rosica says the Pope has already made himself clear.
The fact that he's choosing not to respond is, first of all, the questions are ridiculous. The Pope, by his approach, has brought us back to the time of the New Testament, to the life of Jesus. The Pope has answered this, and what he's saying is, do you see this woman? Do you see this man? Do you see this person? And if you continue with your ranting and raving, you've missed the point of the document.
Father Rosica dismisses the critics' warnings that the argument could cause a split in the Church. Far from weakening the Church, he says the Pope is strengthening it, attracting more people to the faith.
There are many, many people who have found great solace and peace. And the other beautiful thing is that Pope Francis is not just preaching to the gallery. He's preaching to the world, and I can assure you that there are parts of the world that are listening to the Pope that haven't listened to popes for a long time.
Part 4. The Long Game.
I teach a course in Catholicism almost every semester, and I always ask the students at the beginning, what is the name of the Pope, etc. For many years, I would say 20% of the class knew the name of the Pope. This year and last year, I would say about 75% of my students knew Pope Francis's name.
Our final expert witness is Natalia Imperatori-Lee, an associate professor of religious studies at Manhattan College in New York, whose research focuses on the Catholic Church. She says Pope Francis isn't so much sparking a revolution as continuing it. The revolution started, she says, in the 1960s at a huge meeting of all the world's Catholic bishops, the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II as it's known. It aimed to reposition the Church in the modern world. In the words of the then Pope, John XXIII, to throw open the windows of the Vatican to let in some fresh air.
Vatican II opens the windows. There's a lot of anxiety about too much rapid change, and so it gets pulled back.
Subsequent popes quickly closed the windows and kept them closed.
There was a little bit of pushback. Well, it takes usually about 500 years for a council to really have an impact on the church. It's not the sort of thing that's like a light switch. People are very used to doing things a particular way, and so it's like a pendulum.
But Vatican II had let a little air in. Mass is no longer held in Latin. Priests now stand and face their congregation, rather than having their backs turned.
Many people see Francis very much in continuity with Vatican II.
They say that the Pope isn't trying to change the Church's teachings, but is simply trying to lead the Church in the new direction as first laid out by the leadership in the 1960s. So how much success could he have in that? Natalia Imperatori-Lee says it's true that the idea that people who have divorced and remarried should be allowed to receive communion has shocked many in her own country.
In the United States, we tend to reduce religions to sexual teaching, in particular Christianity and Catholicism. So this idea that the Catholics don't allow divorce has set the church apart from other Christian churches in a world or in a society where people enter and exit relationships somewhat flippantly. The church stood as this prophetic voice to not do that.
However, there are more than 1 billion Catholics in the world, and most of them don't live in the US. More than 40% are in Latin America, where Pope Francis, an Argentinian, is himself from. The number of Catholics in Africa and Asia is fast growing. And the view from elsewhere looks quite different.
In Latin America, sexual questions, yes, are important, but so are economic and political stances. Many places all over the world are not focused on the issue of divorce and remarriage. And you can see why. I mean, if you're coming from a culture where polygamy is customary, or if you're coming from a country that's dealing with a massive migration crisis, then who can receive communion, which is a footnote in Chapter 8 of this very long document, doesn't seem as important.
Natalia Imperatori-Lee believes many Catholics are open to change in church discipline. But while Pope Francis might have the people on his side, it's a long game he's playing.
The real question is, and the way that popes have effects on the church long term, is in appointing bishops. So the question is, how many bishops will Francis get to appoint? How many of those will become cardinals who will be among the pool from which we elect the next pope? That's how popes really have an effect. That's how revolution, in terms of inside the church, that's how that happens.
Is the Pope Catholic? Those who want to uphold the letter of church teaching might have their doubts. But Pope Francis's supporters point out that the word Catholic means universal, all-embracing. They argue that in reaching out to those who've been excluded, while at the same time allowing his critics to voice their dissent, Pope Francis is not only Catholic, but the most Catholic Pope in living memory. The Inquiry was presented by me, Ruth Alexander, and produced by James Fletcher and Helen Grady. All our episodes are available as podcasts. Just search for BBC Inquiry with an I wherever you get your podcasts from.
This is the BBC World Service, where we have been in the studio making a podcast.
Inspiration is for amateurs.
I want people's senses to be engaged.
This is magical.
The podcast is called In the Studio.
How did you do this? What's real? What's not?
We're going to visit some of the world's great creative minds in their places of work. Okay, how do we make this thing?
It is a wonderfully chaotic place.
If I hit the keys, there's no sound.
I like things that defy gravity.
Just say the goddamn line.
I think there's something very inspiring about being in a place where inspiration has struck.
It was a big eureka moment.
And I think if you want to understand a work of art better,
scrap that idea.
talking to the personal people who've created it in the spaces in which they've created it.
That was my grandfather clock.
Is a fantastic way in.
I think that's it.
In the Studio. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts or go to bbcworldservice.com/in the studio.
On the way shortly, your half-hour guide to work and money. It's World Business Report. Coming up today, the Spanish government moves to impose direct rule on Catalonia. A former Spanish economy minister and a Catalan tells us why he believes independence for his homeland would be bad for his country. And in a special report from the West African nation of Senegal, we hear from communities threatened with destruction because of rising sea levels. First, the latest world news.
BBC News with Marion Marshall. The Spanish government has said it will start the process of stripping Catalonia's autonomous powers on Saturday. The cabinet will draw up measures for formal approval under Article 155 of the Constitution. It's never been invoked before. The move came after the Catalan leader threatened to get the regional parliament to ratify independence if Madrid refused to talk. The Kenyan opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has reportedly told the head of the country's electoral body that next week's rerun of September's presidential poll should be postponed. On Wednesday, the official, Wafula Chakubati, said he could not deliver a credible election in the current circumstances. Chinese state media says the country's leader, Xi Jinping, has been given his own political theory, which would entrench his position at the top of the ruling Communist Party. The president's ideas are to be known as Xi Jinping thought. He would be the first Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping to lend his name to a political theory. European Union leaders have arrived for a summit in Brussels, stressing their unity. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, said they were united in support for Spain over the crisis in Catalonia and united behind the EU's negotiator, Michel Barnier, in the Brexit talks. Over dinner, they'll hear the British Prime Minister Theresa May set out her latest thoughts about Britain's withdrawal from the EU. Russian scientists have warned of grave threats to the ecology of Baikal, the Siberian lake that contains more fresh water than any other in the world. They say more must be done to stop polluted water flowing into the lake, killing its unique flora and fauna. One of the most enduring stars of French cinema, the actress Danielle Darrieux, has died at the age of 100 after a career spanning 8 decades. Starting at the age of 14, Danielle Darrieux played opposite some of the biggest names of the day, both in France and in Hollywood. BBC News.
This is World Business Report from the BBC World Service. I'm Mike Johnson in London. Today, Spain's government on a collision course with Catalonia. As Madrid moves to impose direct rule on the region, we hear from a former Spanish economy minister.
We are in the middle of a blinking game. The two sides are looking at each other and expecting that the first one will deal decisive blow.
Two of the world's biggest banks, HSBC and Standard Chartered, are drawn into a corruption scandal in South Africa.
I think if we don't deal with it decisively, if we don't show that this kind of behaviour will not be tolerated, then certainly the ANC will be affected negatively, as it has been.
And I'm Marie Keyworth in Senegal, where coastal erosion threatens to wash away one of the country's most important towns.
The major problem is the ocean and the erosion. Things are going very, very, very fast.
More on that's coming up over the next half an hour or so. Well, Spain's government is certainly ramping up the pressure on rebel region Catalonia. Madrid says it will begin the process of stripping Catalonia of its autonomous powers within the next few days. This after Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont made a new threat to declare independence. This was the Spanish government spokesman, Íñigo Montes de Vigo, speaking to reporters in Madrid earlier today.
The Prime Minister has called an extraordinary meeting of the Cabinet on this coming Saturday. In that Cabinet meeting, they will approve the measures that will be delivered to the Senate with the aim of protecting the general interests of the Spanish people, among them the citizens of Catalonia, all the citizens of Catalonia, and to restore the constitutional order in the autonomous community of Catalonia.
Tension has been steadily rising between political leaders in Madrid and Barcelona since a disputed referendum at the start of this month. Catalan leaders say it resulted in a resounding yes for independence, but the central government regards the vote as illegal. Alfredo Pastor is a former Spanish economy minister. What did he think about the government's move to suspend Catalan autonomy?
We are in the middle of a blinking game. The two sides are looking at each other and expecting that the first one will deal decisive blow. The end of this episode is elections in the Catalan parliament, for sure, and that will happen probably before the end of the year. The unknowns are what can happen in the meanwhile.
Won't this, though, just inflame the situation if the government in Madrid tries to take away autonomy for Catalonia? Isn't that going to make the situation worse, create anger?
Yes, and this is why the Spanish government is hesitant in applying this article. All that the President Rajoy is doing, it seems to me, is to go through the preparatory steps and in case the article has to be applied. But my impression is, from what I hear, that he would prefer not to have to do that.
And you were born near the Catalan capital, Barcelona, weren't you? Do you believe independence for the region would be a good thing?
No, I don't think so. It wouldn't be good for Catalonia and it wouldn't be good for Spain. Catalonia and Spain have a long history in common, and that long history has not always been bad. In economic terms, certainly Catalonia would experience sizable loss. In the short run, in the long run, no one knows. The main industry in Catalonia is tourism. And tourism is already feeling the impact of these last episodes of the fight towards independence. The second is investment, plus, of course, the effect of many firms. Now they come to about 800 firms which are leaving Catalonia.
But how do you think this situation is going to be resolved? All this historic bad feeling between Madrid and Barcelona, if I can boil it down to two cities, how will it ever be resolved if not through independence for Catalonia?
The independentist movement has been carefully nurtured over the last decade. It has not always been there. People of my generation have been told by our parents who were in the Civil War, they were on one side or on the other side, and we inherited that. Those are beliefs that you can revise as you get older, and those beliefs could be revised in Catalonia as in the rest of Spain.
Are you worried about the future for your country?
I don't think that this is going to come to a real separation, either political or mental, because at the end we are pretty reasonable people. We don't have things that you see in other countries in Europe. We don't have an extreme right party, for instance. We don't have an extreme left party. The issues that we are facing are issues that we can solve.
And yet, a couple of weeks back on the day of the referendum, pictures were beamed around the world, weren't they, of Spanish police beating would-be voters with truncheons and rubber bullets being fired. Those pictures were beamed all around the world. That doesn't look to the rest of the world like reasonableness.
Yeah, I think that the intervention of the police force was an extremely unfortunate move. There have been unfortunate incidents, and they could have been avoided. It was completely unnecessary. But don't believe that we are back at the Franco times. And I think everybody has perceived, also in the government, that has been a horrendous mistake.
That's the former Spanish economy minister, Alfredo Pastor, now a professor at the IESE Business School in Barcelona. Britain's finance minister has ordered an investigation into claims that two global banks are linked to a corruption scandal in South Africa. The move comes after a member of the House of Lords, Lord Peter Hain, told Parliament that HSBC and Standard Chartered may inadvertently have been conduits for more than $500 million taken out of South Africa illegally. This was Lord Hain speaking to the BBC earlier today.
I'm sure, having been briefed by South African whistleblowers very high up in the system, that billions of South African rand and hundreds of millions of pounds have been laundered abroad through Hong Kong and Dubai, and key banks, which have large footprints there, must have been conduits for this.
His concerns relate to
last 40 to 50 years. So in a sense, what we're dealing with is the failure of the ANC to transform these institutions and to clean them up.
Isn't this, though, going to stand as a stain on the ANC's record for years to come and affect its attraction in the eyes of the voters?
I think if we don't deal with it decisively, if we don't show that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated, then certainly the ANC will be affected negatively, as it has been.
So what does it all mean for President Zuma then? He's the man at the top.
Well, absolutely, and I think that that's the crucial point. As the leader of the organization, he is the one responsible for ensuring that if these things are going on, that they're exposed, they're dealt with, and that there are consequences. Secondly, if, as is alleged, he's involved, then certainly he should have stepped down a long time ago, and I think if he doesn't, then the conference will have to deal with him.
And what do you think all of this has done and is continuing to do to people's trust in big business? Not just businesses owned by individuals like the Guptas, but more broadly as well, in multinational businesses like KPMG, which have been drawn into this saga, had its top management team sacked because of all of this. What do people think about business now?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a terrible state of affairs because what you have is across the board, from the business sector to the public sector, politicians, all of these people involved. And there's no way in which anybody that of any sane mind whatsoever can be anything but appalled by this.
ANC party member Philip Dexter. So how serious is all of this for HSBC and Standard Chartered? I asked the independent banking analyst Christopher Wheeler.
Well, at the moment, these are clearly just allegations that Lord Hayne has made, and really, I don't think we can judge how serious they are until we actually discover whether there's any real substance to them.
And Lord Hayne has said this could have been done inadvertently. Even if it was inadvertent, though, even if any bank didn't realise that stolen money was being moved through its networks, how much of a defence is that?
It's not much of a defence at all. Both of these banks have suffered, unfortunately, in the United States. HSBC were fined $1.9 billion for money laundering through their Mexican subsidiary. Standard Chartered were hit a couple of years later in respect of money laundering or the way they traded funds with Iran. Both of these got substantial fines, embarrassing moments, and obviously reputational damage. So these banks obviously are very, very nervous because there is no real excuse. You have to have the controls in place.
And presumably, given that they've been hit by these issues in the past, they would have presumably put in extra procedures, extra measures to try and pick anything suspicious up, wouldn't they?
No, absolutely. I mean, Standard Chartered now have a new CEO, or relatively new, Bill Winters, who certainly has been very involved in strengthening the compliance coming from his JP Morgan background. Stuart Gulliver, in fact, CEO of HSBC, actually added a sort of a filter for the way he judged his business after the Mexican problem by saying not only, have we got critical mass and profitability in businesses, but are they businesses that possibly could have legal implications for us? Because if we do, we don't want to be in those.
How easy is it, or how challenging, maybe should I say, is it for a bank to detect money that's come from suspicious sources, shall I put it like that, and is being moved through its system?
Well, I think a lot of people probably listening to this programme have had the problem of moving money or finding they have some money which they're closely questioned by their bank, even though it may be a few £100s, because of the money laundering controls that are so essential and the know your client rules that are so essential. But I also have to think to myself that I trained as an accountant about 40 years ago, and one of the audit questions was always the auditor is a watchdog, not a bloodhound. Unfortunately, I think banks now have to be bloodhounds as well as watchdogs.
So what do you think happens now? UK financial regulators, the Serious Fraud Office, are going to go through transactions at these banks with a fine-tooth comb?
Well, I'm afraid these bodies have not exactly got a reputation for moving quickly, and indeed, it's complex. The speed at which they actually can discover whether there really is a problem and there was some wrongdoing, it's not going to be certainly this side of Christmas, and it may not be this side of Christmas 2018.
That's the British banking analyst Christopher Wheeler. So how did investors react to those claims about links between HSBC and Standard Chartered and corruption in South Africa? Russ Mould at the investment company AJ Bell is with me. What was the reaction from the markets, Russ?
Fairly muted. I mean, both company shares moved down by around 0.5% on what's a down day for the markets anyway. And I think that's mainly because, as Christopher Wheeler said, there are no allegations of wrongdoing. It is a preliminary investigation. So although both firms have been caught out in this respect before, as Mr. Wheeler made clear, there's no actual allegations of wrongdoing this time. So it will be a long time before we find out if there has been wrongdoing and if it could lead to regulatory penalties.
OK, and you said a down day for the markets. I mean, US share markets hit new all-time highs on Wednesday, bit of a retreat back, as you said. Memories of the 30 years ago,
yes,
the whole Black Monday
Nothing
crash?
as extreme as Black Monday today, thankfully, when the US stock market fell by around a fifth in one day. In fact, the Nikkei 225 of Japan has just set a 20-year streak for its best wins of 13 consecutive rising days. So things you can argue are getting a little bit bubbly in some areas with Japan or Bitcoin or real estate or property or bonds. So there are some areas that are looking a little bit overcooked. And it's interesting that the People's Bank of China governor today has warned against the risk of what he called a Minsky moment in China, whereby there is a period of calm and prosperity leads to excess speculation, excess borrowing, and once those securities start to fall, then people can't finance their debts and they become forced sellers, and then you get a downward spiral. So it's good to hear that the regulators are actually out on the watch for some of the things that did cause the 1987 disaster.
OK, and whether you believe them or not, the latest GDP figures, the size of the Chinese economy, were out today.
Yes, third quarter GDP growth of 6.8%. Pretty much in the middle of the target range laid down by President Xi Jinping. You can be cynical about them. They're released incredibly quickly. They're not revised, and lo and behold, they're exactly on target during the 19th Party Congress. But nevertheless, it does look to be a number that's reassuring people. Again, though, debt is growing faster than the economy, which again is why the People's Bank of China is on a state of alert.
Russ, thanks very much indeed. That's Russ Mould from the investment company AJ Bell. Well, the main London share index, that's down 0.5% at 7,509. The Dow is also lower. It's down 0.4% at 23,061. Currencies in London, the pound rose 0.1% to $1.31.9. The euro is at $1.18.5 US cents. Well, if you were listening yesterday, you'll have heard our special report on the development challenge ahead for the West African nation of the Gambia and its new president. Well, today, our intrepid reporter Marie Keyworth has crossed the border into neighbouring Senegal, where there are urgent calls for help from communities threatened with destruction by coastal erosion. Marie.
That's right, Mike. I'm actually on top of a building looking out over Senegal's capital, Dakar. It's a hazy day, the sun is beating down, and I can see out over the Atlantic Ocean where there are small banana-shaped fishing boats dotted out over the water, and the skyline of the city is stretching off into the distance, round coves going off and off into the haze. Now, this is the most westerly point in Africa, and so much of it has been built around the close connection to the sea. Behind me, Dakar's busy port is bringing in cargo from around the world, and up the coast, locals rely on fishing and tourists to visit the beach. But the sea is also becoming a threat. Up and down its shores, Senegal is feeling the effects of coastal erosion. I went to one of the worst affected places, the town of St. Louis, 4 hours drive north of Dakar. It was Senegal's capital up until 1957, but now its very existence is under threat.
This is a very important town in West Africa. It used to be the capital of...
Biram Sek, sitting high on his horse-drawn cart, starts his tour of the island of St. Louis. His town was first founded by the French colonizers in the 17th century. They spotted an island in the middle of the Senegal River estuary, built on it, and used it to control trade for centuries. It was the capital of Senegal for 85 years and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
What fascinates the most is this architecture. It's unique. Typical house with the balcony made in wood. Underneath you can
The streets are laid out in a distinctive grid pattern. The beautiful colonial houses with their original ornate balconies are faded and crumbling. And there's another side to St. Louis life, just off the island, on the other side of the river.
So we are along the river. And we're just at the edge between the main island and the fisherman village. That's what we see on the other side.
The fishing district we're looking at is on a narrow strip of land called the Langue de Barbarie. It stretches 30 kilometres to the south of St. Louis, where the river mouth finally opens to the sea. It's only a few hundred metres wide, densely populated and home to St. Louis' fishing community. But this narrow protective strip of land, the only thing standing between the UNESCO World Heritage Site and the open ocean, is being eaten away by the sea.
The major problem is the ocean and the erosion. things are going very, very, very fast. You see many families completely outdoors with all their luggages ready to leave because the water is completely in the house.
I cross the short bridge to the bustling fishing community of Gwendar. Bonjour. And it doesn't take long to find Idia,
Ça va bien? Et toi?
whose house has no roof and no walls on one side.
Every 6 months, it comes and destroys the house and then get back. The sea always destroy everything, but we don't have the choice because we don't have anywhere else to live. So we just wait and then we come back.
So you rebuild every time and the sea comes and knocks it down every time. How do you afford it? Isn't it expensive when your house keeps getting knocked down?
It's hard and difficult, but what can I do? I ask God to give me the means to go somewhere else.
We've come to a place further down the coast where they've actually built a sea wall to protect the houses. And it's striking because I was here just 3 years ago and remember very clearly a huge sandy beach. Now it's completely gone. There's a sheer drop down into the waves and the seawall is itself in parts collapsing. And the houses are falling into the water. Coastal erosion and rising sea levels has been causing the beach to retreat for decades. But recently it's been disappearing at an alarming rate. This is put down to an intervention by the Senegalese government further down the coast. For years, St. Louis was flooded during the rainy season. To help these sudden flows of water escape the estuary, the government created an artificial opening in the Langue de Barbarie, a few kilometres below the town. This opening to the sea is called the brèche, or breach. It created a suction effect, pulling sand away from this beach and depositing it further down the coast. The fishing community of St. Louis aren't the only ones affected.
This island was 200 meters more in the river. Here there was sand and gardens.
On a long wooden fishing boat known as a pirogue, Jean-Marie Dupart takes me on a tour of the estuary around the breach. He points out what remains of a village, completely submerged in water.
You can see there are the trees in the river, and the tree who is here, it was the tree who was in the schoolhouse.
When it was created in 2003, the artificial opening was 5 metres wide. Now, 14 years later, it's a whopping 6 kilometres wide, a development no one predicted. Vast amounts of the protective strip of land have been washed away, exposing villages that were on the bank of the Senegal River to the full frontal assault of the sea.
When the bridge in 2008 was in front of the village, in 5 years all the island was under the water. In 5 years.
The village of Doune Babadier has been completely destroyed, and hundreds of people have been forced to relocate inland to areas with no electricity, no water, and no land for them to farm. Amet Dieng is the village chief.
It was a real shock when all of a sudden your house and where you work disappear. I am angry because we were not consulted about the breach.
Jean-Marie says that if nothing is done to protect the coast by the island of St. Louis, then Senegal's old capital could also go underwater.
In 5 or 10 years in St. Louis, if a bridge comes, all the town is under the water.
St. Louis Deputy Mayor Ada Dieng understands the sense of urgency.
The city of St. Louis is being attacked by climate change. Yes, the breach was man-made, but it was designed to prevent flooding. It saved St. Louis from floodwaters, but it created other problems. Studies have shown that if nothing is done, in 50 years' time, the Langue de Barbarie will disappear, therefore causing St. Louis itself to disappear. So we're very worried. The state is helping, but we want more to be done to save St. Louis from coastal erosion.
With the plans to save St. Louis yet to be realised, my tour guide Biram Sek, on his horse-drawn cart, is afraid that one day there'll be no town for him to show people.
Before they talk about restoration of colonial houses on this main island, they should talk about erosion. Because if Langue de Barbarie disappear on Monday, the main island will disappear on Tuesday.
Listening to that with me, Ousmane Sène, Director of the West African Research Institute. Ousmane, Senegal feels the economic impact of a number of environmental issues. We heard there about coastal erosion, but that's not the only place where the sea is causing problems, is it?
Yeah, you described it well. That's coastal erosion in Saint-Louis and in the area called Barnier away from Dakar. But if you go further down, there are other phenomena. Like in terms of fishing, the fishing cycle, the life of fish, the cycle of life of fish, all this is being disturbed and disrupted, and people and the government need to find some solution. If you go, for instance, because Saint Louis is what we call La Grande Côte, the greater coast, and as you go further down, it is La Petite Côte, the little coast. But there, you have rivers with salt, and lowlands are being invaded by the salt water.
So the sea is coming up into the farming land?
Absolutely. And initially those lowlands were meant to be used for farming, particularly rice farming. But if you got the salination, that is to say the invasion of those lands by salt, there is nothing you can grow. So wherever you go in Senegal, you really feel this impact of climate change.
There's another issue as well. This is all wrapped in together. You have different kinds of rainfall, less rainfall in the rainy season, higher temperatures, which means actually more people are coming from the inland regions and moving out into the coastal areas as well, which is putting more pressure on.
Absolutely, and this is so very much related to the rain pattern that the area where you get the biggest immigration trend, that will be the center of Senegal, close to a city called Diourbel and Touba. There, this is the region where you have the biggest rain deficit every single year. People not being able to farm anymore are going to drift to Dakar, and from Dakar they will be drifting with those dugout boats to Europe and other parts. So migration or emigration is also connected with that phenomenon.
And very quickly, is there anything being done? Are there good initiatives that you think are going to help the situation, like tree planting or something like that?
Yeah, initiatives are being made, like tree planting. Or by the way, you have in Senegal one big project which is called the Great Green Wall, and it started in Senegal to run from Senegal maybe to East Africa, to have a big belt of trees to protect from the encroachment from the desert. But apart from that, there are many programs of reforestation, and at the same time also in the ministries of the Senegalese government there are initiatives which are made in order to counter this. For instance, you got the Ministry of Fishery which initiated a workshop where they wanted fishermen to be aware of the fact that the resource is being depleted and fish farming should be introduced and developed.
Ousmane Sène, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining us in World Business Report. Back to Mike in London.
Marie, thanks very much indeed. That's Marie Keyworth on Senegal's battle